So we are a couple minutes past, so we will go ahead and get started as the last couple of folks trickle in. But hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our last talk of the semester as part of the Science Communication Education Research Network. Our network is part of an NSF-funded coordination award that's aimed at improving science communication education through research and practice. So we bring together scholars and practitioners from education, education, sciences, and communications disciplines to exchange knowledge on ways to improve the future of science communication. We're particularly focused on building the field of science communication education and establishing effective training for the next generation of science communicators to help build bridges in a polarized society. Today, we are very excited to introduce our speaker, Dr. Anthony Dudo. Dr. Dudo is an associate professor in the Stan Richards School of Advertising and Public Relations, just part of the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas at Austin. He received his Master of Arts in Communication from the University of Delaware and a Ph.D. in Journalism and Mass Communication from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dr. Dudo is a leader in the field of science public engagement with more than 75 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and professional reports in the field. He's also the co-author of Science Communication for Scientists, which was published last year, and I know I personally loved. His work spans diverse areas in science communication, including science communication as a space for belonging for scientists in training, and the goals and objectives and practices of engagement efforts by scientists. He's also the faculty committee chair of UT's cross-disciplinary science communication minor, and from our conversations, is really excited about bridging science communication with education. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Anthony Dudo.
Hey, thanks, Erin. Much appreciated. Yay, welcome. Oh, good to see everybody. This is so exciting. What a great way to end the semester. So I'm going to start trying to share my slides here. So I'm thrilled to be here. I'm so excited that this network exists. I'm excited to have now be like getting connected to this network. And the more I kind of interact with y'all, the more I realize that the things that are really motivating me day to day right now with my work going forward are the exact same things that everyone in this network is thinking about or currently doing. So it's an honor to be here and to have a chance to talk with you. The way I'm thinking about this is that this is a great opportunity to start to build connections. And I hope as I talk today, maybe you'll find some overlap in your work or things that you're thinking about, and that through the network or through emailing or whatever, that we'll be able to engage in some thought partnership and some collaborations. So with that said, for what I want to talk about today, I actually want to cover a lot. And I'm not going to give just a straight up, here's a research study we did, and here's what we found, and here's the methodology. That would be boring and feels like a wasted opportunity. So I'm going to talk a little bit holistically about an area of research that we're currently doing. But I also try to be increasingly mindful when I give talks like this about devoting 5 or 10 minutes at the beginning to just talk about like who the heck I am and what I do and why I do it. So that you have a clear sense of like what, again, if there's an opportunity for connection in the future, you'll kind of know what I'm all about. And I do want to spend a lot of time talking about the work I've done here at UT Austin related to building science communication pedagogy. We've had some successes, we've had some failures. It's far from optimized, but it's this continued kind of exciting grind that we're on. And so I want to talk through that. Again, so that maybe there's a couple things I say there that resonate, or there's a couple things that we're doing differently that maybe you want to try, or maybe I'll say I've done this one particular thing and you'll be like, oh my God, Anthony, that's the dumbest thing ever. Let me tell you why. And that's cool too. So I love good feedback. But I do want to talk through the teaching. I'll talk a little bit about this area of research, and then real quickly just wrap it up into like some food for thought going forward. So if that sounds okay, we'll dig in. And I wanted to pose this quick question for everybody as we get started. My hope with this is that over the course of the next hour, if you're willing, you'll just provide an answer. It doesn't need to be perfect or, whatever. But I would love for you to enter something into the chat. And then the good folks at CERN are going to take those comments afterward and kind of aggregate them together. And we can kind of look at that group of comments post hoc after the talk and see what pops out. So the question I have for you is, if you had to name one thing related to well-being that you wish was part of your science communication curricula, but currently isn't, what would it be? Okay, so chew on that. If you have a quick answer, pop it in the chat. If you want to think about it, that's great. And if you hate the question, you can just ignore it. That's fine. But just wanted to get you to start thinking a little bit about this topic of well-being. So with that, let me just hop into my quick 5-minute spiel about who I am and why I'm here. Back in the 90s, and I'm starting to get to that age, that point in my life where I'm like, wow, okay, I've been doing this for a while. That was when I did my undergrad work, and I wanted to be a science journalist. And so my undergrad degree was in journalism. And at that particular time in the 90s, I was really into issues like anthropogenic climate change and environmental conservation. And I wanted to write about that in the very traditional sense. And that was my plan. And then I got this amazing internship my senior year at an organization called the Nature Conservancy. And I'm guessing some of the folks on the call are probably familiar with this organization. And I was in their communications office. I didn't really know that this kind of job existed before I saw the internship and I applied to it. Long story short, I got in there and I loved this job. This was kind of like, holy cow, this is an amazing internship. And I was basically the connective tissue between the folks trying to communicate on behalf of this chapter, the Nature Conservancy, all of its different stakeholders, including a lot of the brilliant scientists and ecologists who worked at the Nature Conservancy. After that experience, I then parlayed directly into a similar job, which was the best job out of college ever, which was working at a huge natural history museum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is where I grew up, called the Academy of Natural Sciences. And I was working in their communication and marketing department, doing similar work to the kind of work that I did in my internship. I always joke, I have this picture here. This is the Gigantosaurus that was in our dinosaur hall, and my office as a 21-year-old was like right around the corner from this thing. And I remember feeling stressed out frequently at my first job. And whenever I would get really acutely stressed out, I would leave my office. I would walk out into dinosaur hall. I would look at those dinosaur bones. And then all of a sudden I would be like, oh, okay, those emails really like aren't that stressful. Like everything's going to be okay. And so it's an amazing job right out of the box. But this crazy thing was happening as I was there. And I only worked there for 3 years before I went back to grad school. But it was a very intense 3 years. And operating as that connective tissue, I started to observe these patterns, I will say, in my trying to be the go-between or the gateway between the experts at the museum. And there were, I think, over 350 PhD level scientists across all different sorts of disciplines that worked at this museum. And tried to communicate about their research with all their different stakeholders, I started to see these patterns. And these are just some of them. I saw this kind of continuous conflation between communication and education from our scientific experts. I saw a lot of condescension, even if it was unintentional, in the way that they would talk to other folks related to the museum. Lots of use of jargon, this broad belief in a thing called the public that you could actually engage with. And there's no such thing. I can talk about that later. I often recognize this feelings of kind of detachment and kind of impersonal communication, guarded communication, speaking at people, not with people, and an overestimation of kind of communication skills. And all of this led me to, really kind of propose this ultimate research question, which is like, well, why do we have these gaps? Why do we have these problems? How can we empower scientists and experts to communicate in ways that are more human and communicate in ways that are then arguably going to be more effective? For a number of reasons, which I won't go into, that turned into a graduate degree and has then basically turned into my career. So I started out doing practice as a science communication person, went in, learned how to be a social scientist to study science communication, and then out of my degree at Wisconsin, landed at UT, where I've been ever since, where I'm a social scientist who does research on science communication, but I'm also a teacher, and I'm also always trying to be anchored in challenges that are actually out there in the real world for science communication practitioners. I try to ask research questions that come from them. And then I try to do work that can then feed back into that continued connection. That really matters to me. And so here's my big slide. It's really fun. If you've never written a slide where you articulate your professional identity, I highly advise you try it. I still don't know if this is right, but it feels at this moment as good as I can get it. A social scientist whose research, teaching, and service enhances research and practice of science communication. I am a visual learner. I do both. I know it's not one or the other, but I really help learning. I learn better visually. And so this is my attempt to say the same thing in a visual slide. So that's me, that little icon there on the left. I do research, teaching, and service like a typical academic. And there's lots of different kind of layers that I'm connected to through those efforts, all of them, right? Starts right here where I am at Moody College and the Center for Media Engagement that I work in, broader across our whole campus, nationally and internationally through all those different levels of research, teaching, and service about all different sorts of science communication and environmental topics, right? I'm topic agnostic. I move from topic to topic using the lens and the tradecraft of communication science. This is a big slide and a really important one, and it's where you might see yourself in it, you might not, but I like to be really clear about this. I can only really make this slide because I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm at the point where I'm starting to have some really, really clear opinions based on empirical evidence and based on 20 plus years of anecdotal experience. So this is what motivates me every morning. Science has a communication problem. The problem's especially urgent. Doing more of the same to address that problem isn't going to solve it. We've been trying that for 75 years. And innovation is therefore required. And oh, by the way, and this is one that should definitely resonate with you, one of the main innovations should be to improve communication pedagogy for scientists in training, period. I'm biased. I work at a university. I teach. I do research. I feel so strongly about this. And for the next 20 years, it's one of the things that I just really, really, really want to lay into. Okay, there's my backstory. And now I want to talk a little bit about all the fun and sometimes missteps that we've had trying to build science communication capacity here at UT Austin. And so here's my timeline slide of kind of what we've done. So I started here in 2011. I was mostly just completely focused on research for those first 5 years. And then as I earned tenure, really was given the opportunity to lean more into thinking about pedagogy and the shift toward teaching. And so in 2016, we created a science communication minor. It was co-hosted by our College of Communication and our College of Natural Sciences here at UT Austin. The College of Natural Sciences encompasses a lot of our STEM degrees. We have geosciences is separate. We have a huge engineering school, which is separate, but our CNS is really big. And so we created this minor with them, formed a minor faculty committee. Once the minor was created, I was brought on to kind of lead that faculty committee and provide kind of some oversight and direction for the minor. We then, as kind of my agreeing to oversee and that minor was that I said I have to be able to create and teach an intro to science communication class that I can teach every semester in perpetuity that is required for the minor. And I will not oversee the minor if I'm not able to do that. Everyone was fortunately completely on board with that. And so I created that thing and I teach that every semester and have done since. I was also then asked to, given the opportunity to start teaching a science communication seminar to STEM grad students and postdocs here at UT, and I teach that every other spring. So it's not every semester, it's not even every year, it's every other spring at this point, but I do that regularly. I just launched another new class called Strategic Science Communication, which is kind of a 200 level science communication class that I started last fall. I'm teaching this spring, again, with designs to teach that in perpetuity going forward. We published this textbook, which was mentioned to earlier by Erin, which I'll get back to in a little bit. And now we are hopefully still in active growth stage. Some of you might know that higher education, especially state universities right now, are going through some difficult times. So the ability to kind of build new things at UT right now isn't maximized, but we're still trying to be creative and figure out how to kind of keep the positive momentum going here. And I'm having the process of having really exciting conversations about how we're going to scale some of these things right now. So that's our timeline. I'm going to dip into some of those things a little bit more specifically. I'll try not to bore you to tears, but again, if any of you are in the process of creating a minor or you have one already, this will just give you kind of a point of comparison, which may be helpful. Again, the minor's been around about 10 years for now. I've been serving as the chair of the faculty advisory committee since right after it was created. We regularly enroll more than 100 undergraduates in the minor. I'm not an expert on this, but I'm told that that's really healthy. Our college at any given time has between 6 and 10 different minors that we host. And this one is, I'm told, a very, very healthy minor within our college, which is great. I'm going to skip to that last point. Next fall, it's going to start opening to all majors. So up until now, it's not been open to all majors. It's been restricted to comm majors, and it's been restricted to CNS majors. So all the folks in engineering and geosciences and from any place over the university are going to be able to start taking the minor next year. So that enrollment of around 100, I'm hoping, is obviously going to grow. So that's very exciting, and I'm looking forward to that. I mentioned these three courses. I'm going to talk through them really quickly, again, in case you're teaching courses like this or looking to create them. Maybe there's some value there. I'll talk about all three of these, focus on each one just a little bit. This course is the Intro to Science Communication course that I mentioned earlier. When I created this course, I went out into the world and I did a content analysis of every single Intro to Science Communication course that I could find that existed. I don't remember how many I found at that point, maybe between 15 and 20. I was very generous with that sample. So some of them are really focused on like science journalism and things like that. And learning from what was out there, learning from what I know and my expertise and my research, I created this class and have been teaching it since. A big learning point from this class was that I teach these science communication classes online and asynchronous, right? So there are strengths and there are weaknesses with every modality of teaching. The reason why I do this is because I found over time, I didn't start this way, that our STEM students are so busy and so restricted in terms of working in labs, in terms of their course, and also in terms of their norms from their PIs and whatnot, that I have to make these classes as flexible and as accessible as I possibly can. If I do that, they seriously enroll students, which is great. So I've learned over time to love teaching these classes online and asynchronous. And there's some things we can't do, but there's a lot of stuff we can. And my major thing is accessibility and getting these classes to more scientists. So I'm absolutely like willing to sacrifice, some of that other interpersonal interaction that we get from being in classes together. This class regularly enrolls between 800 to 200 students a semester, again, from diverse majors within Moody and within CNS. That's going to grow once that minor opens up. The courses, I focus it very much on fun and use a lot of mixed media because I'm trying to get scientists to drink the Kool-Aid of communication. Like I am saying, like, come here, you don't need to know anything. You're going to learn a lot, hopefully, and you're also going to have fun doing it. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. And, teaching evaluations suggest that I'm being successful there. And so that's been a big thing. I made the course way too hard the first year I taught it. It was way too rigorous. It was too focused on scholarship. And the STEM undergrads were just like, whoa, like, what are you doing? And so I had to rethink kind of the content and how I structured things from there. The new course I started next fall is called Strategic Science Communication. You could think of this as a 200 level science communication course. It's based on that new textbook, which I just co-authored last fall. I'm going to get to that a little bit later in the talk. If you're unfamiliar with it, you'll see it. Again, this is also online and async. I started with 30 students last fall to make sure it didn't turn into a dumpster fire. It went really well with 30. So then we've scaled it to 50 this semester. Next fall will be 75, and we'll kind of keep going up. And I'd love to get it as, the goal again is to get it as big as I possibly can. And again, have students come from all different sorts of majors for it. The emphasis on this course, if the intro course is what you'd expect it to be, a landscape of the whole kind of ecosystem of what counts as science communication or what is science communication, what are the major issues in that space. This is much more focused on taking the kind of the strategic science communication framework that I've done a lot of work on, combined with the all dissenters methods, like tactical approaches to science communication. And it's kind of a hybrid of those two things. So we focus a lot on mindset and like framework of communication, and then on kind of skill and tactical development for doing it. And we're thinking about ways to scale this now, as I've mentioned before. The other course, which is frankly the best class I've ever taught and like most enjoyable and best the one will ever teach it. I mean, in terms of like the gratification I get from teaching it, is this course to our STEM grad students and postdocs that I teach every other spring. I desperately want to teach this course every year, or ideally every semester. It's limited to 20 or 30 students. It's 0 credit. They can't take this course otherwise. I can't do anything with them in this course outside of our time together in the classroom. I give them tons of material in a full Canvas course. And I say, here's a resource for all of you who are interested, but I can't have any expectations. I can't do any grading because of how busy they are in their labs. And these are grad students. They have some PIs who would be angry with them if they knew they were taking this class with me, as weird as that sounds. It has to be a very light lift on the administrative side, but it's beautiful because the students who take the class are all either actively playing around with communication or they're really curious and they think that it's kind of an aspect of their identity that they want to build. So we don't need to waste time in this course like talking about why communication matters. We can just dig right in, and it is such a fun course. I have an example here, a picture of it's very interactive the way I teach this class. This is from one of my former grad students who's just this brilliant person, Nick Bennett. And she TA'd this class with me for 2 years, and she did a number of fun assignments in here, but we would brainstorm about what are things we could do to ruin Americans' trust in science. And we'd look at all these things, we'd brainstorm, and then we'd all realize collectively that, like, oh my God, we're actually doing these things. And it was always a really old, like, teaching aha moment, like, oh God, okay, what do we do about that? So this is just a really, really fun course. And also one that we're looking to thinking about how we can expand. I teach this course in person. And so the big question is, can I teach it in person? Can I also make an online async mod? Can I do badging? How can we make this stuff accessible to students that can't find time to come into this particular class? And I mentioned a textbook that we published last fall. And the world is such a crazy place right now that 6 months later, we're like, dude, how did we not have chapters on this topic, or we don't have a chapter about AI and science communication? It's like, what? But we will as we continue to pull it together in future editions. But I'm highlighting here kind of a key thing, a rationale for why we created this textbook. I want to be really clear. So me and the other co-authors of this textbook, we're all R1 universities where we actively are disincentivized for taking time to write textbooks. Like, I wrote this textbook and I have colleagues here that are just like, thanks for wasting your time. And I don't care, because this is awesome. This feels like a privilege and an honor to be able to sit down and write this thing. And I believe that this was strongly needed, and my colleagues at their university did as well. And so we were very lucky to get funding from the Reed Allen Foundation to pay to make it open access. That was really important to us when we created this, because we wanted this to be something that a well-intended scientist who finds themselves teaching a science communication class could turn to access for free. It assumes they have no knowledge about best practices from communication, and that it gives them the lightest lift possible to teach this class in a way that's fun, enjoyable, and, if I'm honest, hopefully doesn't perpetuate problems that are part of the science communication ecosystem. We see this all the time, really well-intentioned people, a biologist who's like, I've been communicating for a long time, I'm going to teach this class. That's great. But then they get in there and you find out they just spent 4 months doing the deficit model. And you're like, I love your intentions, but the content matters, and this actually may not be helping. So that's why we did this. We think it's important in that space. Okay, time to move on to as advertised science communication and well-being. Let's talk a little bit about research. Broadly speaking, Erin mentioned this earlier, at this point, the work I've done in this space has really covered a lot of, I get bored very easily. And so I play around all these different spaces, and I like to work with different people. And so we have done work on science communication focused on all different sorts of stakeholders in this ecosystem, on citizens, like classic research on public opinion and attitude formation. We've worked with professional scientific societies, what they do and don't do related to supporting science communication for their members, the Science Philanthropy Alliance, lots of work with media professionals and journalists. That's really where I got started, and my PhD program was very much focused on science journalists, on fellowship programs, training programs. And for me, probably the area that I spend the majority of my time, most of my time, is focused on the experts themselves and understanding why they choose to communicate, why they stay away from communicating. When they communicate, what does it look like? What are their goals for communication? How do they know if they're doing it well? Yada, yada, yada. But very much focused on the experts themselves and understanding their communication identities, and then ultimately how to enhance those communication identities. we use theories and best practices from communication research to do this work, right? So that's where I am. I'm not trained in education, so I've dabbled a little bit, but I mean, I absolutely am not. There's a ton I don't know about that space, and one of the reasons I'm super excited to connect with folks like you in CERN is to learn what I don't know, and figure out how to do this better. I'm not a theorist, right? I have colleagues, they spend their career building theory. I use theories as lenses to understand and help me answer research questions effectively. Neither's right or wrong. It's just that they're both needed, and that's more how I approach and use theory. So let's get to the specific project here. So we started this project myself, and then one of my PhD students, Josh Anderson, was my RA on this project with a group called SciLine, which is part of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Long story short, they exist to help improve relationships between media professionals and expert communities, specifically to improve the quality of science journalism by connecting science journalists to actual experts in that field. They do great work. They've been around for a while now, and they were really interested in doing some research that would help them kind of understand better the nature of the interactions between the journalists who are part of the network and use their service and the scientists. And so Josh and I were happy to hop in there. It's exactly the kind of research I love doing. We did that, but this really crazy thing happened along the way. This timed in with kind of the tail end of COVID when we started this project and ran for 4 years after that. And we were doing multi-method research here. We were doing interviews with journalists, interviews with scientists, and then having what we learned there inform a huge parallel surveys of both of those groups. And we found out a lot of really cool things about what we went there looking for, but one of the things that the data told us we had to pay attention to was what I'm broadly saying, this issue of well-being. And so we ended up, all the research we've done, like the early research we've done from this is focused on human costs of science communication, which is, again, it's not where we thought we were going to go when we started this project, but it's where we are right now. And so I'm just going to talk at the aggregate level about some of our learnings from 3 particular studies that we've done about this from this larger project. This is my attempt to put a unifying question across all 3 of these separate papers that we've done. We have one that's already been published, which came from our interviews with science journalists. We have one over there on the right that's in press right now, which is focused on the surveys of scientists and journalists that we did. And then we have one that's currently under review, which is focused on the interviews that we did with science communicators. And so, again, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learned at the aggregate level from these 3 studies. So what does the demand landscape look like? And I'm not going to bore you with the theories. I'll mention some of them as we talk through here, but there's a very specific theory that we latched onto as we were doing some of this work that helps us kind of organize and think through it. And one of the key things we were focused on when we were hearing from them is, my gosh, these 2 populations are expressing a lot of demands related to their identities as science communicators. And really, one of those had to do with structural pressures as a part of their occupation. So for journalists, they kept talking about and telling us about their concerns and their trials and tribulations related to the changes in the media ecosystem, specifically the collapse of traditional science journalism, the rapid rise of freelancing, the extensive amounts of invisible labor, of sourcing that they had to do, the amount of self-promotion and branding that they had to do as what felt like almost a full-time job to be a successful science journalist, and drastically expanded workload and reduced pay and insecurity related to their profession. With scientists, we heard a lot of similar things. We heard, structurally, often no or very little formal credit or incentives for their communication work, serious time pressure related to anything that they would do related to science communication, and a real struggle to manage the competing demands of research, teaching, and then adding this additional layer of communication onto that. These are things that have been documented in various ways for a long time, right? We didn't really go in necessarily looking to have these conversations, but what we found was the folks we were talking to, this is what they wanted to talk about, right? So we had to listen. The take-home message here from the demand landscape is both groups are being asked to do a lot more, but they don't have they don't feel like they have institutional scaffolding to be able to do these things. Very intensive demands. We also heard back loud and clear that there was a lot of demands in terms of the environment, the communication environment, and the context into which they were walking. And they were all telling us stories about the hostility they were receiving as a result of their communication. Folks who were communicating, or science journalists who were writing about COVID-19, who were writing about climate change and other kind of controversial or politicized topics, were really feeling the brunt of this. They were feeling demoralized. They were questioning whether or not they were going to continue to do this work as a result. Scientists were telling us the same stories. I'm tired of being harassed. I'm being doxxed. I have pseudo death threats. There's coordinated industry attacks, lawyers coming after me and after my institution. One scientist spent 15 minutes telling us about a 54-page document that they keep about hate mail they got. An interesting side note to this, a lot of these scientists said that I don't even think I study anything that's controversial. And they were still feeling this, right? And so this was, we would get off these calls and I'd debrief with Josh. He'd be like, I did a couple interviews this week. You did a couple interviews. Okay, what did you hear? And every time we were like, oh my God, they just wanted to talk about burnout again. And so, for us, it was like these don't seem like outliers or standalone events. They feel like a pattern. These are feeling very much like common features of doing science communication for these communities. And not surprisingly, what we heard, these people were basically talking to us. They were describing burnout. It takes one to know one, because at the same time I was going through burnout as a professional, and so I was learning more about, well, what does that look like operationally, and how do I know if I have it, and how do you recover? And so I'm listening to these conversations like, oh my God, they're all burnt out too. And so I won't read through all these things, but it was not uncommon to be speaking to folks and to have them start crying during the interviews. And I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm just trying to really get across the how palpable and powerful these conversations were. And ultimately, what we were hearing a lot from both populations, and what's really worrying, is signs of disengagement. I'm not going to be a science journalist anymore. Or I'm questioning. I've been a really active science communicator for the last 35 years of my career. I've been on MSNBC and NBC and Fox News and PBS and you name it, and I don't know if I'm going to do it anymore. And it was like, whoa, we're hearing withdrawal, we're hearing disengagement, and that's a little scary. And this theoretical framework that we've used in some of this research is called the JDR model, the Job Demands Resource Model. It comes from occupational psychology. It's very robust. It's been around a very long time. It's agnostic when it comes to a profession, but it has very strong predictive and explanatory and organizational power, as any good theory does. And one thing it shows us, regardless of your occupation, is when your demands chronically outpace your resources, you will be burnt out, you will disengage. That's what happens. It's not like a surprise when it happens. And I'm looking at that model, and I'm looking at these other fields, and I'm looking at what I'm hearing, and I'm like, holy cow, right? Like we're there. So you ask about those demands, and then you flip that over and you ask about resources. As kind of the yin and yang here of this picture, understanding the likelihood of burnout. And so we were then asking them about their resources, and we talked a little bit about how they develop skills as a communicator. The folks we talked to, they recognize communication as something that's like its own thing that requires its own skill set and its own kind of development. That's actually very positive, because I have a lot of data and have been in a lot of places where science communication isn't something necessarily that a scientist thinks deserves its own attention. And so that was good. Training, when they brought it up, which they frequently did, like formal communication training, was valued. And then I'm going to get to its limits in just a second. On the other part of the slide, they were able to mention a lot of big science communication trainers that they had interacted with and found value working with, which is great. A thread that also came through as a resource was how incredibly important it was to have a mentor that normatively showed them, when they were a junior scientist, that communication is valuable and it's accepted. And so the folks who I talked to that were more senior scientists who had been in the trenches of doing this work, they would tell me a story about a PI or a mentor who told them it was okay. Um, there were lots of limits to these resources, kind of caveats, if you will, that came up in these conversations. Is this issue of access to training is not equal. Also, the fact that they had experienced some trainings that they thought were helpful and others that they thought were money grabs or were not helpful. And this idea that came across a lot is like, it feels useful, but I know it's not sustainable, it's not systemic, and it helped me in this kind of N of one situation, but you can't really, it's not additive, right? And that's an issue here too. And this idea of training, interestingly, is one that can serve as either a demand or a resource. If you have access to training and you're getting trained up and you're building your efficacy, it's a resource. If there's training out there and you can't access it, or you get training and it's bad training, it can make you feel more underprepared, right? So then all of a sudden it's actually a demand. It's not a resource, right? So it's you have to kind of think about this in that dual way, which I think is really important. And the other aspect beyond that was just talking about, well, again, this institutional support you feel like you have or you don't have. And I extracted a particular quote here because I think it does a great job of encapsulating what we heard. So I am going to do the thing which you should never do, which is read a long quote from a slide. There is so much demand for public-facing science communication right now. It's just astronomical, through the roof demand. But in practice, there are almost no institutions or job descriptions that actually accommodate it. This gap is very bizarre because everyone's like, science communication is so important. It's a crisis, but nobody is supporting it tangibly. I am increasingly baffled by why this gap persists. There was other versions of this quote from almost all the scientists who we talked to, and I could go into detail, but the TLDR on this is they hear soft encouragement and they feel no material support. And we even had a couple who had communication as a formal part of their job description as a scientist, who would tell us stories about even the extent of the formal resources and support they had for their job was, when it came to communication, was highly questionable. And so we arrive at this issue, the resilience, what I'm calling the resilience paradox. And if those of you who are into well-being, and again, I'm not a scholar in well-being, or like I'm learning all this stuff as I do this work in this space. If you've spent some time learning about resilience, I always think of it as like a kind of a double-edged sword or a two-sided coin or whatever you want to call it. It's like the folks we talked to, like they described resilience, their individual resilience, as being the resource that can help push them through these intensive demands and as the thing that they've leaned on. So it's effective. And they view it as a fundamental trait to be able to work in both of these spaces. And then when we did our surveys and we did some boring modeling stuff, which I won't go into, we find these interactions at the end. We were trying to understand, well, what are the correlates of burnout for science journalists and scientist communicators? And we found that the really strong correlates for journalists was the extent to which they felt overworked. And for scientists, it was the extent to which they experienced negative work experiences, things like doxing, trolling, and those kinds of things. And we find in both of those situations that if they also reported that they had a high level of individual resilience, that it would really attenuate those relationships. In other words, it would actually push down the extent to which they would feel burnt out. You can look at that and you say, oh, good, resilience is the intervention. Yeah, but it's kind of this thing you have to be aware of, but it's part of the story. And why is that an issue? Well, here's why it's an issue. And again, 30-year-old me wouldn't say this maybe so bravely, but almost 50-year-old me has no problem saying this whatsoever. Seeing resilience as a solution places the burden on individuals, and it completely absolves systems from having to ask difficult questions and change. That's why SCERN's here, right? It's like, okay, we need to do something at the systems level to make these kinds of changes. So it's a very big deal. And I'll sorry, I just have a little bit of an issue with there we go, my PowerPoint. Okay. So what are the take-home messages that there's a bunch of different things we could talk about. These are the big ones that and I'm thinking to this thing living on YouTube after this talk, and that's why I have a lot of text on this slide in case you go back to this and look at it as a resource. Um, so, I would say comfortably based on our research that we've been doing, but of course, based on all the literature review that I had to process all the literature I had to process as part of our literature reviews, burnouts here in the science communication space. The demands are absolutely outpacing the resources. And therefore, we should not be surprised if we see science communicators withdrawing from doing this work because they're getting burnt out. Resilience is real. It's something that we can be mindful of. It can be something we can explore as an intervention point. Like we think about teaching, like to what extent can we help someone build efficacy related to their own individual resilience, right? We can ask that question, but if we treat that as the only intervention point, that's a problem in my view. And so again, we need to be thinking about systems. You can't kind of equitably build individual resilience, right? So we need, again, institutional change is needed. The rhetorical support, the soft encouragement is not going to fix this problem that we're seeing with burnout. And really, if we want to get morbid, but I think we need to be morbid about this, is then we have to say, well, then what's step 2? What's step 3? If we play this out, where do we go from here? Is these costs are unlikely to stay contained. And there's a really cool piece I just published in 2025 about this, totally forgetting the author on this because I just read it recently, that's documenting evidence of chilling effects and spillover effects in this space. So chilling effects are the direct effects, like if you've been doxxed as a scientist communicator, like you say, I'm pulling back, I'm not doing this. A spillover effect is when a scientist down the hall from that scientist sees them doing that, and they are then impacted by their willingness to communicate is impacted as well. And so we're starting to see evidence of that as well. This really bothers me and it really scares me. Why? Because there's also this other area of research in the space that's been very much focused on junior scientists and STEM graduate students. And there's some early evidence that's suggesting that they have kind of more sophisticated understandings about communication and kind of this additional layer of willingness to do it. So my thought is, whoa, that's exciting. Let's meet them. Let's teach them. Let's get them communication opportunities. That's great. But we need to be very aware of this going along with it, right? Because if we're throwing them into that space, that's a little bit, that's a little bit dangerous. And so I'm gonna stop with some future thoughts here, and then we can pivot to the Q&A. I realize I'm kind of running out of time, but this is another powerful quote. I cherry picked this one to show you all because this is a CERN talk. We're all together, we're all part of CERN. And if this doesn't speak to you, what will? This is a very senior scientist making this comment, someone who's very experienced as a public communicator. I never took a class in communication in grad school, and dear God in heaven, there should be one for every scientist. Anybody going for a doctorate in any kind of the sciences or mathematics or any of the technical degrees, there absolutely must be a communication part of this. And I was like, amen, hallelujah, when I heard that, right? This was like a very powerful quote, and also something that a lot of them said. And so 2 slides really quickly for implications for, SciComm education and our efforts to think about this and build this. I see this as directly providing fuel for the thinking, the tough work that everyone on this call is trying to do related to doing this work in pedagogy. We need to find ways to build curricula, to expand curricula, to build this pedagogy. We need to build it. We need to test it. We need to improve it. We need to make it accessible. We need to make it flexible. I have so many colleagues around the country, our country right now, and frankly beyond, that are playing with science communication education right now. And that's one of the things I hang on to refill my cup, is like, we're playing with this. We see that it's important and we're trying. That's great. Let's try to get it right, even if we're not getting it right. So that's the first thing. For me, it's a non-negotiable. And then you start to think about, well, then what do we need to do in these efforts? I would say we need to move beyond the traditional approach, which is very much focused on teaching skills to scientists to communicate more. That's part of what we need to teach. But if we start and end there, it's wildly problematic, even if it is unintentionally problematic. What I found through all that experience I've had teaching and also through my research, that there is a real need to get scientists to understand themselves as communicators first before you can teach them skills about how to communicate. There's a real need to get scientists to understand the broader ecosystem of science communication before you can get them to step into it effectively. And in many cases, there are myths that a scientist will come into the communication context with that you have to be able to identify and then gently disabuse them of those myths so that you can almost reprogram them into thinking about communication in different ways. Acknowledging these risks, I view as really important as we continue to understand the relationship between science communication and well-being. If we continue to see evidence of burnout, demands outweighing resources, we can't be asking scientists to drink the communication Kool-Aid and dive into the communication pool head first without telling them a little bit more about like the costs and benefits of doing so. Otherwise, we're just inviting more burnout. So being transparent about that and really wrestling with that, I think, needs to be part of how we teach it. And if some scientists opt out when they learn those things, that's okay. That's all right. um, Three more, and then I promise I'll move on. This other issue of linking learning to performance is a big deal. I'm totally out of my depth on this one as someone who's not an education scholar, but I know there's a thing called situated learning that matters greatly. That's basically what we're looking at here, right? We can teach someone, but if we don't give them an opportunity to practice and perform the thing we're teaching them, it's not going to have longevity. I have seen this story over and over again from this project, but from all the research I've done with fellowship programs and training programs. There's most programs through logistical reasons are not in a position to be able to do this. But if we're thinking about building capacity within educational institutions, we might be able to think about how we do this. I'm having these conversations at UT right now as we're thinking about how we can expand pedagogy for science communication. We're looking around at all of the different science communication options that are available for our grad students here, and we're going to start to think about how we can link the folks who go through my classes with those opportunities to communicate. Mentorship matters greatly. Find those mentors, support those mentors, center those mentors, get them in front of junior scientists who we're teaching science communication about. They have to have those examples to counteract the examples of the PIs who are curmudgeon about communication. So we have to find them and we have to support them. And this last one is a huge shout out to Nick Bennett, one of my former doctoral students who published a paper together. We did a research project focused on STEM graduate students. We did a bunch of interviews with them, focused on what communication means to them, and how it impacts their identity as a scientist. And this is the other coin of well-being, is we find that communication spaces can actually contribute greatly to the rejuvenation and the spirit in the identity building of junior scientists. They can be really positive places. They can even be places that counteract a lot of the toxic baggage that comes with getting a degree in STEM, an advanced degree in STEM. And so as we build these classes, we should be thinking about to what extent are we building spaces, communication spaces that can really help them refill their cup and again, counteract some of those negative demands that they're facing. Okay, I've talked so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I'm going to stop talking. Hopefully there's some time left for the Q&A. There is,
Thank
yay.
you so much. Thank you. I don't know how much you were watching the chat, but we had a
I
very
was not.
engaged chat
Okay,
session going
good.
on during this
That's great.
talk, so I'm sure there are lots of questions. Jay will be posting a link to a Google Doc for folks to drop their questions into so that if we don't have a chance to get to your question, we will share those questions with Dr. Dudo to answer, and we'll send out those answers along with the link to our recording later on. So feel free to start dropping questions there, sharing out loud. I see we've got a couple of hands up, so Alberto, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. Really, really informative. We've got many questions.
Alberto, I know you. Sorry, I
Yes.
hear your voice. I see your name, and I'm like, I know you. Good to see you, Alberto.
Thank you. Yes. So my first question is more from your perspective or from the interviews and the data. Is the lack of institutional support a USA specific phenomenon, do other countries, other nations, funding agencies and so on? Like I see Australia and Europe do so much more, or at least SciComm research, but that may be my narrow perspective. And so are journalists and scientists all over the world suffering?
Yes. So really important disclaimer, right? So these studies that we did, they were focused on North American based scientists and North American based journalists. So for sure that's kind of a limitation and a bounding of the research that we just did. If you go into this literature and look at it more broadly, you will see similar patterns across other cultures and in other countries. Speaking broadly, my sense has always been, however, Alberto, that the infrastructure for science communication kind of practice has always is ahead of the curve. We're lagging in North America. If we look at South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, different parts of Europe, the United Kingdom, they have been thinking about science communication and how to build that into systems much longer than we have here in North America.
Thanks so much. Let's go ahead.
I think Zendaya has her hand.
Yeah. Perfect.
Hello. Thank you for allowing me the chance to speak, but also thank you so much, Dr. Dudo. This was a fascinating talk, and you brought in such fascinating data to illuminate your points. I'm wondering, building from the study that you talked about with science journalists, and not necessarily in an international space, but looking for alternative spaces where science communicators live. For example, social media, right? The science communicators who communicate in that space and are battling a lot of misinformation or disinformation in that space. I wonder too about their well-being, right? Because they're
Oh,
probably. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
100%. Yeah, and sorry, you just got me excited. I'm not trying to cut you, but,
Yeah.
but I do want to I want to make sure that's clear too. So that data that I just showed you, so the interviews with journalists and the interviews with scientists. So the scientists we were speaking to about this, they were doing communication in all different sorts of ways. So they at times they were talking about their interactions with journalists, but they were often talking about communicating on social media. And so actually that is a lot of that data is coming directly from their experience as being someone who's a big deal on TikTok or was a big deal on Twitter or whatever it might be. And again, if you look at some of those papers, you will see quotes in there that are saying bye bye X or whatever it might be, because they just can't bear being on social media anymore.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because that's I've seen reaction videos from scientists in those spaces saying, we've got too much to battle here and we're going to move to another space to do so. What about, and I have a follow-up question to that, but I'll leave that in the docs because I'll let other folks speak. But thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Zendaya. Yeah, and if you want to talk more, follow up on email. Yes,
Will do.
please. Same, Alberto, you too.
Thanks so much. Folks can continue to raise their hand if they want to share their question here, but I'll also pull from the list. Do you have any recommendations for early career or even younger scientists who are feeling this pressure and trying to avoid defeatism?
Oh gosh, yes, yes, and it's funny because it's not a magic wand, but this is based on my own experiences. This is based on the qualitative data, the quantitative data, and I might even be this might be something Brene Brown says, so I might be accidentally stealing one of her lines, or Mr. Rogers maybe. For those of you who remember Mr. Rogers. So look left, look right, look up, look down, and find your people. In other words, find your helpers. Norms are so important. And so one of the reasons I love our science communication minor the most, and why I would fight if someone told me it was going away, is because it is the place that those junior level folks in STEM or orbiting STEM, where they can find science communication, they find me, they find other people taking the class, and they're like, oh, you're a biostatistician too, who also is interested in communication. And it's building those early connections and giving them kind of the license and the authority to say, this actually interests me and I want to learn more. And it's okay to spend time doing that. That is so valuable. Staying isolated is going to predict falling off that curve of being interested in communicating. Finding people, feeling like you belong with other folks in that space is so important. And that goes back to Echo. So that's, looking sideways, finding other classmates that value it. And it's also looking up and down, right? It's finding mentors and PIs who can symbolically give you, say that it's okay to do this and that it's valuable to do it.
All right. Jennifer, why don't you go ahead and
Jennifer, hi.
Hi, Anthony. Yeah, so I mean, what you were talking about gave me a lot to think about. I'm really interested in the newer work about sort of refilling your cup and thinking of the science communication space as a place to sort of, lean into the wellness aspect of things. I work with a lot of scientists who, both work on, controversial topics where they might, in their public engagement efforts, be feeling some of that, real pressure lately. And then others who maybe work in a more fundamental science space and don't engage because maybe they feel like their work isn't as relatable to other populations. And I think for those who just don't engage at all, kind of connecting with values and thinking about how public engagement can really tap into parts of yourself that maybe you don't get in your regular work could be really, really interesting. So for me personally, I work with honeybees and like do science with honeybees. And I have found that working with beekeepers and teaching people about beekeeping is something that has really refilled my cup on a regular basis. And it's, it is science and it is science communication. But for me, it really, is valuable. So as you were talking, I was thinking about, so for the education research folks, I know that there's like controversy about values affirmation and its efficacy in sort of getting, reducing performance gaps for certain populations. But it got me thinking about it. I'm going to put a little something in the chat, like a paper that I found that was about. So I wonder for any science communicator, whether this kind of like thinking about what your core values are, what you want to do on a regular basis can, improve well-being in the
I
space.
like I'll can I just Jennifer, can I just kind of plus one that?
Yes.
If we want to think about future research in this space, I mean, you're just hitting on this area that we need to look at, right? Like which so we should keep digging into this. But I mean, oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I have found that, and that's one of the reasons I think why even these findings provide me with cognitive dissonance, but also upset me so viscerally about the well-being thing, is because for more than a decade prior to that, in my research, like surveying scientists and interviewing scientists about other aspects of communication, one of the talking points we would find from like frequent scientist communicators was really positive. It was refill your cup. It was, hey, I communicate, and guess what? Not only does it refill my cup, it makes me a better scientist. Right? Like those are really positive data points, right? And I'm not saying those things aren't there. They can and be there, but it's an increasingly complex space, right? And I want to say one more thing, Jennifer, just again to plus one you and reiterate something that I mentioned before when we think about how we design classes and build classes, about that one learning that I had was that I have to make space at the beginning of these classes to help scientists engage in self-reflection and build their own self-awareness. And that if we start to get into the nitty-gritty of communication before they'd have a time to think about who they are and what they value, and then what they value as a communicator, finding a goodness of fit of what they're trying to accomplish with communication, you kind of can't skip past that part, right? And so like, I'm just completely agreeing with you here.
Alrighty, it is 3:01, so I want to make sure that we are respectful of everybody's time. We have time for maybe one more quick question. Blessing, I believe your hand was up first.
Okay, hi. Thank you very much for that interesting talk. So you just mentioned some of what I wanted to ask. So I wanted to ask about the identity. And, it's interesting that it's not just about skills. So I'm asking, like, these identities, have you, like, maybe a resource out there where I can identify, like, these are the identities and the communication styles that, connect to those identities? Because in my class, I also want to follow that approach, look at the identities and say, okay, what communication styles suit those identities? So I'm just thinking towards that area. If you could help me out with
Oh, yeah,
myself.
totally. Why
Yeah.
don't we, as the dust settles on this talk and we follow up with like kind of the resources and things, Aaron, I don't know, Jay, if that's okay, if that I can share out anything there with Blessing
Perfect.
and others, and I'm happy to do that. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so
sure.
much. I wish we could just stay and talk for, another half hour. If you have any other questions, please make sure you put them in the chat, or not in the chat, in the document linked. And we will include answers to those questions and any resources that Dr. Dudo wants to share in a follow-up email to all of our attendees and linked to our YouTube video. Speaking of which, if you missed any of our other talks this semester, they are all posted on SCERN's YouTube channel, so please check it out. We have had such a great series of talks, and I have so enjoyed hosting them this semester. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you all have a great rest of your week.